Oh, wow. Thank you all. I'm so sorry. Whole time I was on mute. My bad, y'all. Yes. Welcome to African Esquire TV and We Charge Colonialism. This is why I need you all, because I would have kept going and won my whole video and then found out that there was no sound. So hopefully everything's good now. Welcome to African Esquire TV, everyone, and also We Charge Colonialism. This is the final installment of our series on African, on the story Fostering False Identity, the child welfare system design of social control of the Black family. I hope that this has been a productive conversation for everyone. Just let me know if you hear me okay now in the chat, because I don't see any further feedback, but yeah, so we've been going through this book that I wrote. I wrote it at the top of this year, and every single week we've been going through and dissecting what are the issues as far as African children, what are the issues as far as all children. And so today we're going to focus in on something that's very important, that is the solutions. What do we do about these situations? Okay, so I hear that the sound is good, so that's good to know. So I'm going to jump in to a lot of things to give you food for thought. Ultimately, the purpose is that I hope that everyone will think about what can I do in my own communities, and then obviously we want to have more conversations broadly as African people. But a lot of this is not going to happen unless we take our own initiatives, and I think that's the problem when it comes to whenever we allow these white liberals to come and basically drive the conversations, and they'll tell us what's good for us, and this is the things that should be done. And sometimes they're saying things that are helpful, but ultimately we have to have that mentality that it's not for them to change, it's for us to change. And they can certainly partner with our programs, if you feel good about what we're if you feel good about what's actually happening, you could certainly partner, but it has to be African people who are driving the conversation, who are organizing, who are coming together. Otherwise, we're going to keep being in a position where we're going to be waiting for someone else to tell us what to do about our own problems. And so I want to jump into a lot of different possibilities as solutions. Before I get into that, just to let everyone know a couple of things. I'm sure many of you have saw by now, and just in case you haven't, I do want to share the link. WCC's has been in partnership with a number of Pan-African organizations for a coalition called Africa Unity Movement for Decolonization. We released our declaration on last Friday, the 17th. That was the We Charge Colonialism, We Charge Genocide. I'm looking for the link. I'm sorry. That was the anniversary of We Charge Genocide. And so we wrote out really what colonialism is. It's important for everyone to understand what we're facing as African people and not think that it's what the system tells us, but understand that it's what we can identify and what we can attack. So this is the link in case anyone has not had a chance to view it yet. I'm also going to be premiering the program we had on Black Power Media the other day. Also below the link is also the link to the conference. I need everyone to please register for this conference. Right now we're in pre-registration. If you're inside of a quote unquote European nation, so Europe or the US, the cost is $25. If you're inside of the global South, so Africa, Caribbean, Latin America, the pre-registration cost is $15. I want everyone to please register because number one, we want to make sure that we're being an example and showing the colonial forces that this is what African unity looks like. The whole theme of the conference is Pan-African unity or perish. And we need, obviously, Africans to come together if we're going to have African unity. So that's one reason I need you all to register. And the other reason is that we're going to really delve into the issue of colonialism and hopefully have everyone be armed with knowledge, through this and have different people come in and teach. So it's going to be 3 days, July 21st to the 23rd. It's going to be a hybrid conference, partially in person inside of Zimbabwe and possibly other countries we're still discussing. And for us in the diaspora who probably don't want to travel in this time or maybe just can't travel, it's going to be also online. And so the registration that I posted is for the online conference. So hopefully everyone will support that. I also want to say that in light of today's broadcast, like I said, we're going to be talking about solutions to the problem. I did share a link to just the Telegram group. It's not, nothing nothing as far as pressure for anyone. I understand we're all busy. As you all know, I'm in like different organizations myself. And so I probably can't take on a full another organization right now. But I started the group just because I wanted to give everyone an opportunity following today to further engage, whether it's with me or with other people. And just talk about more so what issues you're dealing with, and also talk about, again, these solutions that we're trying to come up with as far as what we're going to do about our circumstances. So whenever I'm gonna find a link to the Telegram group. The Telegram group is for if you want to chat with other people and myself. Like someone the other day had a question where they were asking about custody, and I was just able to give some quick thoughts on that. But then the Telegram channel is where I'm going to just be doing probably a bi-weekly conversation. We'll see how it goes, just to, if anyone has questions, because it's one thing I know, this system is very difficult to navigate on your own as parents. And sometimes like a simple point in the direction of, have you considered this, or have you told your attorney this, can be very vital for parents. So I'm looking for the link right now. So I'm going to post that in a moment. And then we're going to just get into the solutions as far as what we need to be doing to organize as people who are under siege really right now by this thing called the child welfare system in the United States of America. So, okay, I just found the links and about to post them. I hope these work. Actually, this is, okay, here's for the channel. I'm gonna find a group chat one and share with you all. So this is for the channel for, oh no, that's not working. Okay. Give me a moment, y'all. I want to get these links for you because I understand some of us really do want to deal with the solutions to these problems. Okay, so and all right, so I'm about to post the one for the group chat. And again, this is more interactive. If you just want to talk to other parents, talk to other community members who care about what's going on, this one will be helpful for that. And then I have the link to the channel that I'm going to post. And again, the channel, I can actually just do live streams on live stream conversations, kind of like Clubhouse on Telegram. So I'll just have, some very like informal conversations, just giving some thoughts. And like we said, no pressure, not saying you have to do this, that, and the third, but if you just want to get around other people and just try to figure out solutions, that's the whole purpose of this. So with that, we're going to jump right into the subject of today. And that is, how do we protect our children from the state? Brother Kanata, someone who has been very useful and helpful in WCC, he shared an article with me, and I actually heard the story before, but I think it's a good example of why we as African people can't rely on the state. So I don't know if you all saw this. It happened earlier this year. There was a mother who basically told the police that, hey, I'm have my children in this motel. I'm gonna be checking on them every hour. I have someone else from the outside that's going to be checking on them. And I need to work because it's during the pandemic. Obviously, this goes back to the problems we were talking about earlier. If you don't have childcare, if you don't have supports, if the African community is destroyed and derailed, then you are basically left in a position like, what are you going to do? You have to work. If you don't work, your children are not going to eat. And then you basically get arrested for child neglect or child abandonment. So you're going to have the issue either way. So this mother decided that she wanted to work during the pandemic, but didn't have childcare. She left her children in a motel, and basically the police, as they always do, came and arrested the children when they found out that these children were left unattended to. Now, the good part of the story is that a number of people actually seen this story, and they were able to raise $150,000 for the Ohio mom. Now, I want to pose this question to everyone. Yes, we're happy, obviously, that this woman, she wasn't convicted. The judge said throughout the case, and $150,000 was gone to get her out of jail. So we're happy that the outcome was that she did not become criminalized, basically, further for what she was unable to do at that moment, which was have childcare for her children. But also think about the fact that the community, and I'm going to assume that a lot of people who raised this money were people who are African, right? Who felt and connected to this story. We were able to do something because we recognized that this person did not deserve to be in the position they were in. What would it be if we could do those things before we get to the part where basically the state has to jump in and seize our children? What would happen if we were organizing and talking to each other and meeting with each other before it even got to that point? And that's what we have to start doing, is changing the way that we think. I think a lot of people, when it comes to child welfare, the way that they try to address it is to say, okay, we're going to fight for laws and fight for protections and fight for the caseworkers. You shouldn't be able to go into, I'm sorry, they arrested the children. No, they didn't arrest the children. They took the children. I'm sure child services took the children and they arrested the mother. So the question is, how do we find a way to protect ourselves in the front end and not the back end? How do we find a way to organize in the front end and not the back end? And that's a lot of the issue when it comes to our people, is that we think that we have to get laws to protect us after the fact. How many times are we trying to fight for laws when it comes to police brutality that are going to protect us after the fact, instead of fighting for laws to protect us from the get-go? Because it's not just police brutality, it's a reaction to the other systems that are working against us. So it's a reaction to the drugs being pumped in our community. It's a reaction to the weapons being pumped into our community. It's a reaction to the poverty in our community. How do we get in the front of these issues instead of getting in the back? And that's really what this is going to come down to, if we're trying to change our circumstances and if we're trying to better ourselves in our communities. So let's talk about some solutions. I'm going to go through. Actually, I want to read a quote first from Dr. John Henrik Clarke and let this resonate with you as far as how we currently deal with the child welfare system. It says, "But the African suffered from a kind of naivete he is still struggling from. He permitted Europeans to arbitrate his family disputes. Today in Africa, if there is a dispute, sometimes even a child can arbitrate. The African always looks for an arbitrator. It is part of his custom. If there is a dispute or a fight, the African looks around and says, now who's going to settle this thing? Meaning at this particular point, many of us who are fighting for laws and protections, we're looking for outsiders to arbitrate our issues. We're looking for outsiders to do right by us, instead of looking for us to basically be the ones who solve the problems with solutions. That's what we have to focus on. So let's just go with, what type of child welfare system would you imagine as Black people? Like, what type of child welfare system would you be comfortable with? Now, I cited a book, Children of the Storm, that I cited a number of times in these videos and also in the book. There's a quote. It says, "A system designed to serve Black children must not have only a historical perspective and a social perspective, but a Black perspective. The Black child must be the central focus of the system rather than the incidental or accidental recipient of services designed and operated by and for people." And this is very important to understand when it comes to the current child welfare system, because we're essentially told that we can basically treat our race and treat our ethnicity as if it's just incidental. It's not significant to our survival as a people. So they push on us policies, and they have no adherence to our history as a people who were taken from the continent of Africa, as a people who have struggled in this country for our rights, as a people who were enslaved. They want to give us services that are basically neutral, race neutral. And those services are supposed to heal us from the trauma that was caused to us because of this system. It doesn't make sense, obviously. Me as an African person, I have a different trauma than, let's say, a poor white person. I have dealt with the psychological political aspects of being African inside of a white supremacist country. If you are someone who is Caucasian, you can never imagine that. There's generational trauma that gets passed down. Don't think that we are separate from what happened whenever our ancestors were enslaved. Those things have implications for us. And if you don't receive healing, then you're going to keep transferring that trauma for generations to come. So if I'm a person who's broken by decades, centuries of white supremacist policies, I have different needs than someone who was not. And yet social services treats us as if we're basically our color or our ethnicity is not significant to what we need. No, we need services, we need organization, we need ability to have people who are responsive to our healing needs, and not just going to check a box when it comes to, hey, okay, so-and-so, you did this right, Tierney, you did this service, so therefore you're fine. We can go on and judge you the same way we would judge anyone else. No, that doesn't make sense. So consider what we have today. This is a quote from the book, by author John Lash, and he talks about what social services looks like for the average parent in America. So if you have gone through this, you might identify with some things that he's saying. He says that in the typical case, a parent doesn't need childcare. They need parenting classes. This is something very common in child welfare. They don't identify the fact that you left your children alone as saying this person needed some childcare. They say, no, they needed parenting classes. She doesn't need affordable housing or a living wage or adequate income for quality food. She needs budgeting help and nutrition training. Okay, so again, you don't have food for your family. We're not going to talk about the fact that we have socially isolated you and economically isolated you. We're just going to teach you how to budget. Doesn't make sense, right? If she disagrees with the treatment plan that these judges, mostly white judges, are making for you, she's in denial and needs counseling. And if she vehemently agrees, she may need anger management classes. If there's something she really does need, like education treatment, does need like addiction treatment, it may not be available without a long wait, and it may be in a program that can't accommodate parents. That's another common issue. You might actually not have any of those needs that they put down on their paper for you to fulfill. You might just need some addiction, some addiction treatment, yet there's a long wait list for that. And like they said, the hours are completely like arbitrary. They'll say you need to be here at 12 p.m. every single day of the week. Well, most people would work during that time of the day, but they'll say, oh, well, make it work. I've heard that many times in court. There's no sympathy. It's like, well, you need to make it work because you want your kids. Well, I'm going to lose my job. And they're basically like, oh, well, it's crazy, right? And they said your reward, if you did everything right, is to be described as compliant, giving you a better chance to get your child back. So you don't become, they understand they're not making you whole, but you're only compliant with the white supremacist system that's making decisions about your family. This is the reality of child welfare. And this is why we have to say that this system doesn't make sense, particularly if you're thinking of a people who have been so victimized and is so hurt by this system. The idea that we're just going to check off some services that have no relation to what you're actually dealing with, and then you'll be fine. That doesn't make any logical sense, obviously. So what I would say that we should think about as Africans, as people who have been violated by this system, people who are trying to survive in this system, despite the fact that this system has marked us for exploitation, what I would say is that we should look for a way to basically separate from the system. I'm not saying anything new. This is something that you've heard from people for as far back as Marcus Garvey. You've heard from Elijah Muhammad. You've heard from Malcolm X. You've heard from Kwame Ture. You've heard from so many people saying we have to separate and not allow this system to have authority over us. And you might say, well, that sounds good, right? Because some of us take that serious. We say, okay, we're going to separate. We're going to create a new state. We're going to move down south, and we're going to, formally adopt, some type of African nation. Some of us are like, what are you talking about? That doesn't make any logical sense. Others of us talks about things like self-determination in our own communities. Like, how do we control the police? That's the one that is very common. Let's control the police. Or some people will say, how do we control the education system? There's been movements in the past to control the education system. And this is partially what I would say you should be thinking about, but thinking about it inside of framing it in a way that you are a distinct people. And this is something that you can't get unless you are a distinct people. If you're just American, if you're just Black, if you're just someone that just happens to be in America and happens to be colored Black, you can't get these types of rights that we're talking about. You can't get the right of self-determination. I'm going to explain why. There's a certain way that the law must look at you. If you look at people who do have different types of self-determination, those people have a distinct history, not just a distinct existence, but their history, their culture. That's the other thing. If your culture is just American culture, what is your argument then to protect your culture? If your culture is African culture, then that's the argument to protect your culture. But if you're just saying that I have culture, my culture is just Black culture, well, that's a very abstract notion. If you're trying to argue that there's something you're trying to preserve, that takes a lot more of a identity, that takes a lot more of a history, a lineage that has been, for the most part, under attack from this, or really completely under attack in this country from our inception into this country. So how are we going to find a way to frame this? So I'm going to drop some ideas just for you right now. Now, in the United Nations Charter in 1945, it states that the purpose of the United Nations is to develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principle of equal rights and self-determination, highlight, of peoples. Now, the question becomes, what are peoples? And this is really where the issue of self-determination lies. Are we peoples? You know, you can say peoples as far as people who were colonized in other countries. This is how international law looks at it, basically. So basically, if England colonized Zimbabwe, right? They were a peoples. They had ethnic lineage, they had ethnic culture, they had traditions that were handed down for hundreds of thousands of years. So they're a people. But do we regard people in the United States who don't have that connection, don't have that same lineage or that same generational passing down of traditions and distinct culture? Are they a people? That's how international law is going to question you. Basically, they're going to put you on the stand and say, prove to us that you should be regarded as a people. Now, there's some more, just so you, for your own research, there are some more treaties that establish a right to self-determination. Some of them are mentioned inside of the WCC Declaration. And so one is the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights and Cultural Rights, as well as the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. You should look those up. I believe those exact provisions are actually listed in the Declaration. So if you read that, you'll be able to see that. Now, the most authoritative example of self-determination was inside of a treaty called the Declaration on Principles of International Law Concerning Friendly Relations. And they said this. They said the principle of equal rights and self-determination of people is enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and embraces the right of all people to freely determine without external interference their political status and to pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. So let's think about what they're saying. They're saying that you have a right for all people as a person to freely determine without external interference your political status and pursue your economic and social and cultural rights. It goes on to say that the establishment of a sovereign and independent state, the free association or integration of an independent state, or the emergence into any political status freely determined by a people constitutes a mode of implementing the right of self-determination. So what are we being told here? Essentially, in international law, there's two types of self-determination that are recognized. They say external self-determination and internal self-determination. External self-determination is what we would probably normally see inside of formal colonialism. So for example, whenever you saw African people in the continent start to say we have a right to sovereignty, we have a right to control of our own politics, we've seen that those people were able to assert their right to external determination. You should not have a right to come into our country and to tell us what to do. You should be outside. You should have no control, and we should be able to control our country completely. There's also a recognition of a right to internal self-determination. And this is a harder a harder one to argue. But essentially, if you are a quote unquote minority group, if you're a group who has been oppressed inside of a country, in our case scenario, many of us come from the transatlantic slave trade, which brought us here against our will, enslaved us. And many of us have gone through American chattel slavery. Well, we would be basically making an argument for internal self-determination, unless you're making an argument to separate. So there's people who make that argument. I don't want to diminish that. There's people who make the argument that we want a separate state, a separate nation. But then there's other people that make the argument that we want to have control in our communities, but not necessarily feel that we can make an adequate argument for a complete separation. Now, where have we seen this as far as internal self-determination and external self-determination? We see this with Indigenous Americans. Many of them are in tribes. Those tribes are considered separate jurisdictions. I know there's a lot of politics that go into the tribal lands because they've been given the worst lands, obviously, but we're just going to talk about the idea that they're separate. They have autonomy, they have sovereignty, and they're supposed to be able to make their own decisions. That's what external self-determination is. But at the same time, even inside those who do live inside of the United States, they have certain rights that are afforded to them to control over their own educational institutions, over their own social services institutions. So there's still a right that follows them, that even as they're a quote unquote minority in the United States, they still have some control and some rights as far as their decisions, their political selves. And the question we should have is, why are we not afforded those same rights? Why are we basically, as African people, told that we can get what we can get by the country, by the state? We make the laws, we enforce the laws, and you go by them. You have no say. You could try to reform, but you certainly cannot try to separate and have some type of special treatment. A lot of the reason for that, we should understand, is because Native Americans, Indigenous Americans, first of all, there's a clear recognition in the law. They recognize that they have a culture, and this is why I keep going back to the issue of identity. If your culture is American culture, this argument's not going to work for you. I'm sorry. When they say a culture, they mean a different culture that is separate from American culture, a culture worth preserving, a heritage, traditions, things being passed down, language. These are things that they have to protect. And the American government has recognized that their actions have gone directly against the preservation of Indigenous American culture. So if you're going against the preservation, we have to find a way to let these people, this is the theory, let these people find a way to preserve their culture. Now, if your culture is only American culture, you're not going to have a problem preserving American culture because you're in America. But if your culture is African culture, then you have a problem. There are things, as I broke down, there are things that we have passed down from our African heritage. There's things that we still practice, communalism. We still practice kinship. We still use certain euphemisms, words, music, places of worship. All of these things have parts of our culture that have been passed down even from Africa. But the thing about that is that it's been so diminished that we should be making arguments that we have to, by all means possible, salvage what we have and rebuild our culture for where it has been destroyed. And we can do that, I believe, if we have a clear identity as being not just American, but being a people who are African. So the reason why Native Americans have a different determination, and I'm going to break this down, then I'm going to jump in the comment section, see if there's any questions, but essentially they are seen as a political group. Africans, we are only seen as a social group. But what we should be arguing is that we are also a political group. We should not just be a social group. We should not just be a minority group. We should be a people who have a different political agenda, who have a different political reality in this country. No one else has been brought here in chains and have basically faced the different types of things that we have faced as a people. So this is a political problem. This is not a social problem. You can't assimilate it away. You can't just bring us into the culture and erase the problem. Our problem is that we are a distinct group, we're a distinct political group, we're a distinct ethnic group, and we deserve the right to self-determination to protect our culture. So I hope I explained this well enough. I understand this is a lot of legalese, I think, but I hope that I gave you a good overview. So I'm going to check the comment section right now. Let's see. Looking for some questions, seeing if anyone has questions. Okay, so I don't see anything yet. So feel free to post your questions, question mark, or at me, and I can know that you are talking to me. So let's go and talk about how this actually plays out, because I think that we should understand one thing that the system does very well is that it will try to trick us into thinking that they're giving us what we asked for, even if it's not what we asked for. And um, despite this, we have to be aware of the fact that they'll manipulate things and try to change it around to make it look like they're servicing us, even when they're not servicing us. So I'm going to go into some examples of that. Now, there's something that exists inside of American law. It's called kinship guardianship arrangements. And if you listen to it, kinship guardianship arrangements, that basically mimics African kinship systems, but it's not. And that's why we have to be careful whenever we're allowing, again, others to make decisions and tell us what's in our best interest. So kinship guardianship arrangements, essentially, let's say that my children were taken, right? And the state wants to terminate my parental rights. Well, there's an option. If I have someone who's kin, I have my mother, my father, my sister, brothers, maybe a cousin. Usually it's going to be a blood relative. Rarely it could be a friend, but someone who is very close to me, I regard as kin. I could say, well, please put my child with them, and not just that, don't terminate my parental rights. Allow me to keep some of my rights, but give them the right to guardianship. Now, this might sound good, particularly if you're basically facing completely losing your child. I mean, obviously that's preferable to having no contact with your child and your child being adopted away into suburbia and you don't know where that child is. So it has benefits as opposed to termination, but it's not kinship. It's not a kinship system. We can't, again, allow them to distort what it is that they're actually doing. So let's actually talk about what it is. So in kinship arrangements, essentially, you're going to have a lot of differences than you would have. Number one, a lot of parents, they are basically told that they have to pay child support, to the person who they have given their child to. Now, if you could imagine a problem that this creates. I gave my child to my mother, right? And, me and my mother have a great relationship. But now you all know, I think, how insidious and how horrible child support is. Like sometimes I don't know how you can charge parents who are already poor like half their income. So now I have to pay a significant amount of the money that I make that I need to take care of myself and try to get back on my feet. I have to give that not to the state. I'm giving it to my parent. This creates problems, obviously, automatically. And if you can kind of see, the more and more that I'm going to explain things, it kind of creates this idea that the parent or the kinship person, whether it's your aunt, your uncle, your grandma, whatever, can kind of become a barrier to you actually having your child back. Another thing is that the parent, the kinship parent, gets to make the legal decisions over, or gets to make many of the decisions over your child. So you don't get to make decisions as far as like where they go to school. You don't get to make decisions as far as what doctor. It's basically all given to this person. So we can again see the state is causing friction between many of our families. Another thing that comes into play with these kinship arrangements is that you'll have these caseworkers come in and they will be talking in the ears. Like the caseworker will be talking in the ears of the family. So you have this foreign outside entity that is a part of the state coming in and saying things. Maybe they're saying, hey, so-and-so, she dropped out of her drug treatment. And even though they're not supposed to tell these things, they tell these things. Trust me. They say so-and-so dropped out of her drug treatment, or so-and-so is back with her boyfriend, giving information to the family, again, causing strife. So if we can kind of see, this is not a kinship system, an African kinship system, because the difference between that is that the African kinship systems were flexible. I could give my child to my grandmother, and then my grandmother understood, okay, you're going to get your child when you can, so go ahead and work, get your money, get your stuff together, and then when you need me, take your child, or when you're ready, take your child back. That's not the case. If I want my child back, I have to go to court. and say, I reached this standard, so please can I have my child back from my grandmother? And in kinship systems, the child doesn't have to be the grandma. They could go with auntie, and then it can go with grandpa, and then it can, the child can go wherever the child needs to go. But here, no, they have to stay with this person. And so what happens, and I've seen this a number of times, families who were once functioning, families like who had great relationships, brothers and sisters, and the brother said, okay, give my child to this person so that you don't terminate my rights. And then the child goes to that person, and families, aunts, uncles, grandmothers, they become enemies. And this is something you'll see all the time. People who become placements for the child, whether it's foster care or kinship guardianship, they become enemies of the person who they were helping out. This is another problem when you have the state coming in, going back to the quote from Dr. John Henrik Clarke, the state coming in to arbitrate our problems for us instead of us being given the latitude to do that thing for ourselves. So I hope that you understand that. I'm just going to check to see if there's questions real quick before I go to the next section. Okay, I don't see any questions. So let's go into what we can do. So like I said, the state will try to mimic us. The state will try to give us a sense of being inside of the right place. But these things are not going to be what we would actually create. That's the thing that we should understand. But here's what we should do. Now, again, I'm going to quote from Children of the Storm. They highlight a problem. They say, white control has been at once the most pervasive manifestation of racism in the system, the source of its greatest dysfunction, and the most effective barrier to change. So white control, that's literally a problem. It's under the jurisdiction, the child welfare system is under the jurisdiction of the United States of America, which is a white controlled country. Our problem can only be solved by taking it out of the jurisdiction, out from white control, and putting it under our control. The way that I propose to do this inside of the book is mutual aid organizations, mutual aid societies. And I want to go through that a little more. I think some of us know some things about the idea of mutual aid, but a lot of us might not know that this is something deep in our history. So mutual aid organization is a structure. It gives benefits to its members when they are in need due to a life crisis. And this crisis can be death, sickness, disability, old age, unemployment. They are essentially cooperatives, meaning they are autonomous associations of people who are united for the purpose of meeting their common economic, social, and cultural needs through jointly owned and controlled entity. And the common part should be emphasized, because the difference between white control and black control is that we don't have commonality with the white supremacist system, but we do have commonality amongst ourselves. And it's not that we're going to just have a black figurehead that's going to be basically the white man's puppet. We need people who are similarly situated to us. That's something that's very different than child welfare, when you have these people who come from outside of the community, and they could be caseworkers, they could be judges, whatever, lawyers, whatever, but they're not common to us, meaning they don't have the struggles that we have. They're not positioned the same as we. Whereas in a cooperative, you're not going to have a black overseer. You're going to have a person who's going to be understand that they are the same as you, they are equal to you, they're going to be on your level, and they're going to work with you, and you're going to work with them. It's a mutual, that's why it says mutual aid. We're working together in order to create, instead of having one person be the one who's going to be the head of everything. Now, something that's very important to emphasize, the difference between a mutual aid organization versus a regular social charity organization is the emphasis on solidarity and not charity. Meaning, I'm standing in solidarity with you, my African woman, my African sister. I see that you are dealing with what I'm dealing with right now. We're going to be in solidarity together. We're going to build together based on that solidarity. And it's not going to be me, bourgeoisie person, that's going to come and say, hey, I'm going to give you some charity. Here's some dollars. Go do something with that. No, that's completely against what the mutual aid idea is. The idea is that we are standing together, political allies, culture allies, we're the same people, and we're standing together against this system. Just to read from a quote from Professor Dean Spade, who goes into a lot of emphasis and does a lot of work when it comes to mutual aids. Charity aid, relief, and services are terms used in various contexts to denote the provision or support for survival to poor people, where that support is governed by rich people and our government. Let's be very honest. All of the social services that are in our community, all of the charities, all the nonprofits, if the nonprofit is doing well, in my opinion, 501c3 doing well, it's doing well because it's being controlled by whites. It's just the reality. So that's very different than what we're talking about. It says charity models promote the idea that most poverty is a result of immorality and that only those who can prove their moral worth deserve help. Charity comes with eligibility requirements that relate to these moral frameworks of deservingness, such as sobriety, piety, curfews, participation in job training or parenting courses, cooperation with the police, or identifying the paternity of children. The determination of deservingness and underdeservingness is based in cultural archetypes that pathologize Black families, frame poor women as overproductive, meaning having a lot of children, and criminalize poverty. The conditions of receiving aid are made so stigmatizing that they discipline everyone into taking any work at any exploitative wage or condition in order to avoid the fate of people who must seek relief. And think about welfare. You have to have a job. It doesn't matter. They don't care if your boss is racist. They don't care if your job is going to give you $5 an hour. You have to have a job. They're going to push you into doing things that are demeaning because they have to check off something on their box. So we can see charity, nonprofits. These are things that are not good for us, people. Like I understand there's people who might have a good heart at it, but we should be redirecting even those people to come and build, if you're of our people, come and build cooperatively instead of relying on white funders and white grants and all of these things that are outside of our communities in order to fund your project, because that creates a real problem. One thing I've noticed when it comes to the nonprofit industrial complex, the nonprofit industrial complex will not fund anything that is going to unseat white supremacy. That's a conflict of interest. You see George Soros, he funds a lot of projects, right? But you never see him fund any projects that question white supremacy. You never see him fund any projects that call for self-determination for Africans, that call for us not having a white overseer, that calls for control of us, of the institutions, of the things that are coming into our community. You never see him fund things like that. He'll fund things like anti-racist training. He'll fund things like women's rights. He'll fund things like disability rights. He'll fund things that are going to get his agenda met. He's not the only one. A lot of these charities, I would dare say all of the major charities are set up the exact same way. So we have to understand our solution is not more charities and more nonprofits. Our solution is more control. And you only get control when you come together in solidarity with those who are in your community. So let me also just very quickly remind everyone that this is something that's inside of our history, and this is something inside of our lineage as African people. So mutual aid societies have a long history with our people. Again, to paint the picture for you, our people, we were enslaved. We were completely brutalized and enslaved by the system, right? We become free, on paper, we become free. Now we are left in a position where the white man wants us to come back and work for him. He wants us to come back and work for him in this exact same way that we were basically enslaved. But we say, no, we want to find a way to get away from this system. And this is what Africans faced following the abolition of slavery and even during slavery. And what they were able to do, free Africans were able to do, is come together in solidarity to build institutions that were going to propel their freedom. So I'm going to talk about one in particular. It's a prominent mutual aid society in 1787 called the Free African Society. I actually want to point this out also because it's interesting. This is in 1787, called the Free African Society. It's interesting that those people were not confused about who they were. 1787, they were not confused that they were African. They were not confused. And they were not trying to identify as being something else. They understood who they were. It's just something that I thought was very interesting when I found this. So there was originally a religious institution, but it soon became the premier welfare organization for Africans in the region. And they gave assistance to poor, sick, and family of deceased people. Unfortunately, they basically disbanded because of surmounting debts. Now, it's also important to understand that they were not the only Mutual Aid Society. I'm just going to read from a long list really quickly. There was a Free African Union Society, 1780s, Free African Society in Boston, 1787, Free Dark Men of Color, Charleston, 1981. I'm sorry, 1791. African Benevolent Society, that was in 1827 in Ohio. The Baltimore Society for Relief in Case of Seizure in 1830. African American Female Literary Association in Philadelphia in 1831. The Colored American Temperance Society, Philadelphia, 1831. The Phoenix Society, New York, 1833, Adelphi Union Library Association, Boston, 1836, and the Young Men's Literary and Moral Reform Society, Pittsburgh, in 1837. I don't know if you all also have noticed this. Just something I peeped, that if you look at the progression, so going from 1780s down to 1837, over time, you see less people using African and using things like colored or colored, and some even not even mentioning who they are at all. So that's just another thing to peep what was happening as far as the assimilationist campaign. But we covered that in another video. I'm not going to go back to that again. Many of you probably are well aware of the Black Panther Party's mutual aid societies or mutual aid programs. I'm just going to I think we all know about the free breakfast program, right? But some of us also don't know. They had a free ambulance program, a free medical clinic. They had a program offering rides to elderly people doing errands, and a school aimed at providing liberating and rigorous curriculum to children. So this is something that was very much ingrained. And I think the reason why mutual aid was so popular with our people is because, again, of our African culture. We come from communal societies. We come from cooperative societies. And so when you come from a society like that, there's an observation made by Dwayne Wong once. Dwayne Wong Amawala. He pointed out something. I was like, that's very true. Every time that slavery ended, in anywhere, whether it was in America, whether it was in the Caribbean, whether it was anywhere where African people were, the automatic de facto governing structure became basically socialist or communalist. Meaning anytime, so if you look at a country like Barbuda, they were originally enslaved, but essentially slavery gets abolished, right? They automatically become a cooperative society. If you look at the Maroons, soon as they become free, automatically become a cooperative society. So why is it happening automatically? Because that's our culture. Our culture is not individualistic. Our culture is not capitalist. Our culture is communalist and cooperative and building together. So if we understand that there's a survival aspect in this, it's very important because we're trying to survive America. I don't know about you. I'm trying to survive America right now. I can't survive America as an individual. I certainly can't expect my community to survive America, all being individuals. But I believe we can survive this coming together and forming associations and forming ways of building, of farming. There's a lot of community farms, things like that. That's going to be the solution instead of America doing right by us. Just by history saying like we do right, we do better when we understand that the country is not going to change as far as how they treat us. And we do better when we instead look to ourselves for solutions instead of look to the dominating white supremacist power structure for solutions. So going on, just to wrap up the discussion on mutual aids, I want to just give you more characteristics of why mutual aids are different than charity. One thing is that many of them are quote unquote democratically run, but basically majority vote. So you're not just going to the treatment center, the drug treatment center. You're a member of the treatment center. You get to vote on whether or not this particular caseworker is going to still be in the treatment center. You get to vote on whether or not you're going to have these certain policies. You might even get to vote on the salaries of those people who are going to be paid who work at the treatment center. Very different, right? Another thing is that whereas you have the child welfare system, you can have people from the outside coming in. A lot of mutual aids will rely on people from the inside. So you have people who are of your community, who are your counselors, who are your mental health advisors. They are the people who are better equipped to deal with these things. And obviously, you have to make sure that there's someone who's thinking with an African, thinking with a mind that you are an African who is suffering from the problems of being inside of a racist society, have a mind that is aware and knowledgeable about African history, that person who becomes equipped then to provide you healing, provide you healing services so that you can reach the point where you need to be in order to be able to take care of yourself and your children and your family. So those are other things that are very different. Lastly, as I said in the book, I feel like mutual aid kind of creates a sense of unity among our people. So for example, let's use the Black Panther Party for an example. When they were operating in America, it wasn't just, oh, they're separate, you know? You see their communities come around them. You see their communities cover them. You see their communities rally, you know, anytime they were threatened. And I think when we have institutions that are communally run, you'll see the communities gather around them. You'll see the communities support them. And it will be a way to not just service the people, but to unite the people. Imagine, think about your community. If you live in an African community that is, let's say it's impoverished, imagine like a cooperative that's going to be an education cooperative. And all parents are said, listen, if you don't want your children to be dealing with the education system, you know, we can come together. Hey, we have some people who have teaching certifications, and we're going to come together. We're going to build a curriculum. And that curriculum, we're going to make sure is one that is truly, you know, anti-racist, not one that's just performance, but one that's truly based in African identity and love of yourself, love of your culture, one that's going to analyze the system of racism for what it really is. We're going to teach your children mathematics, teach them history, teach them their musical culture. We're going to do all these things. We're going to do it together. So you have the parents come together, you have the teachers come together, and things like this have happened, by the way. If anyone has not heard of the Brownsville school experiment, Brownsville Community School Experiment, look it up. I think there's even a documentary that you could probably find on YouTube. This thing literally happened, and the reason why it got shut down is because, unfortunately, the teachers unions, who were filled with a lot of middle-class white folks, basically were so threatened by these African parents doing this that they shut it down. But these things have happened. And think of, and in that situation in New York, in Brownsville, New York, the community, when they seen that they were trying to do this, they rallied around them. It became like a whole basically fighting against the teachers unions, and the community supported them. So I think that's another important aspect of the issue of having cooperative institutions and mutual aid institutions. So just to wrap up, and then I'm going to go to the comment section to see if there's any questions. It says that what must be done. These are just the simple recommendations that I give. I don't give detailed recommendations specifically because I think who has all the solutions. I think we can make some basic observations about what's going on, and we should have the people who are most directly affected put the meat to those ideas and actually figure out what's going to work best in our communities. So these are some proposals I have. They're not all encompassing. I'm sure there's some that are missing, but this is what I could think of. I said, number one, when it comes to the solution of the child welfare system, we have to end the jurisdiction of the United States government under our children. And to me, you're not going to get that until, first of all of us take this issue serious. And I have to emphasize this: the Indigenous Americans who have these recognitions of rights to sovereignty, whether it's through the Indian Child Welfare Act or whatever, they worked to get that. They were organized. They were loud. They were about to fight the government. You know, this comes out of the Red Power movement. We had the Black Power movement and the Red Power movement. And unfortunately, sorry to make this observation, but while the Black Power movement was louder, while it was more well known, while it was probably has more recognition in history, the Red Power movement came out with actual laws giving sovereignty to Indigenous Americans. So we have to be very loud about the child welfare system. Loud as the prison industrial complex, loud as any other system of slavery. We have to be very loud. We have to come together, be organized. Again, if I put the link in earlier to, you know, if you want to just start having conversations with other African parents about what's happening and how do we, you know, come together, or just trading information, that could be a starting point. Or in your own community, start a community group where you have other parents who are also, even if you're not dealing with the child welfare system, understand they could easily come in. You know, that's the other reality that we have to face. So these are possible ways that we can start making this a real issue and identifying ourselves as peoples, meaning of African peoples, and we have a culture that has to be preserved. So we have to go to the laws and demand that we have the ability to preserve our own culture. That's to me a necessity when you're demanding jurisdiction over the child welfare system for your own betterment. I also say obviously we need independent, African-led, mutual aid organizations for parents and caregivers and just community members, I would say broadly, because we're really all in this together. And you might say, well, how are you going to get that where many of us are limited on resources? Well, one, mutual aid, it works when it comes to people who are of low income and low resources. But I do think that there's a significant argument for the allocation of funds from the United States government. Many of us are talking about reparations. Some of us are okay with any type of reparation, but we should be talking about what type of funds and reparations are going to go directly to sovereignty arrangements and not go to them to provide the programs. So to me, we should be trying to make those arguments that funding has to go to us, not for you to tell us what we're doing with it, but for us to control what we're going to do with it, how we're going to move, and how we're going to organize. So that's another proposal I have. And then this is one that is flexible. I think we got to start thinking about, if we have self-determination, who's going to oversee it? For example, inside of Indigenous American communities, you have the tribe, who is the overseer, the tribe who makes decisions about, the people. We have not retained, for the most part, our tribes, and that many of us don't know what tribes we're from, and we're not in an organized formation. So the other alternative to that is that we try to create some type of institutional bureau. So whether it's like a bureau that's going to have recognition by the federal government, just some type of institution that's going to oversee child welfare for Africans on a national level. That's another thing that I think that we should be talking about, because you do need oversight and assurance that we're getting what we need as a people. So I have wrapped up the conversation, and I'm going to look to see if there's any questions. Let's see, I see a question mark, so I'm going to guess it's to me. Let's make this bigger. It makes you stop and think, why are they pushing the jab against us more than anyone else? Depolarization. Well, I will say the way that this has become polarized, the way that you see Africans attacking other Africans about this, I hope we could stop and just think about, are we servicing ourselves by stigmatizing ourselves and treating our people as if they're less than because they didn't feel comfortable going with a government mandate? I think that we should be more forgiving. I'll absolutely say that we have to find ways to not go with the agenda of separating and division, because I see a lot of that as far as when people come out and have issues with people when they make their decisions. Is there anything else? Let's see. Scrolling up. Okay, I see a question mark. We'll see. Why are so many Black Americans confused over who they are? I understand they have a unique story, but that doesn't supervise who they are. Why? Well, it was intentional. I think the thing that gets me most teed off when it comes to the issue of identity is that when you have people who supposedly are against white supremacy who are echoing these things, because we should understand that this was an agenda item on the white supremacists. Like they literally intentionally made it their business that we need to make them not understand who they are and where they're from. We have to basically create a slave, and a slave has no history or culture. A slave's history begins inside of the plantation. And that's what people are arguing essentially when they say that, we're not connected to Africa. So basically your history began on a slave ship, or did your history begin when you landed in chains? So that's what your reference point. That's when you're going to go back to, as far as like, this is what I'm about. Like, no, your people, it's an insult to the people. Like, that's the thing that pisses me off too. Like, the people have a history and a culture that they wanted to uphold, that they wanted to keep. I think we don't understand, particularly us in our community, how important culture is. You go to go travel around the world. go, whether you go, even you go to Europe, you see how important culture is to them, but especially you go to Africa, go to Latin America, go to different places, they take culture very seriously. So I promise you, our ancestors took their culture very seriously. And so to see that people hundreds of years later who come from them saying, well, yeah, that their culture before doesn't matter, we're only going to begin right now with where they were enslaved. So we're going to treat them as a blank slate, and America molded them and slavery molded them, not Africa. You're insulting them. I think you have to understand that. I mean, it's sad if you don't. So I am looking for some more questions. Okay, here's one. It says, in Jewish communities, they have Hatzalah that operates as EMS. Is that an example of an organization? I have not heard of that, but one thing I have heard of is that, and I haven't gotten a chance to really look into this too much yet, but my understanding is that in certain Jewish communities, they do have rights to self-determination. Not that's even like very interesting, because indigenous Americans, their argument is, we were here living our own lives and you came and imposed your culture on us. And my call for Africans would be that we were in Africa living our own lives, and then you come and wiped our culture from us, or tried to wipe our culture from us. And Jewish Americans are an immigrant community. And so if they're able to get a recognition of self-determination, and we are not even focused on that being our call, because some of us are still integrationists to a fault, then it's very unfortunate that we're not understanding the politics of what's happening, and that the system will not change. The system of white supremacy will not change. I'm sorry to tell you all, it's just not going to change. Okay, so I think we are good. Oh wait, another question about the Jewish communities. Wait, no, I just posted that. I'm sorry. So I think we're good. I think we could wrap up. So everyone, once again, I hope that this was helpful. I would just say, if you purchase the book, Fostering False Identity, link is in the description. If you could please leave a review, that would be very appreciated. Hopefully a good review. That would be very appreciated. And I appreciate everyone else who has already, I never even asked you to all to leave reviews, and many people have already gone and left wonderful reviews. So thank you to everyone. And I also just want to emphasize again, we're trying to come together more and have more conversations. So again, if you want to join that Telegram group and meet with other Africans and just talk about what the solutions have to be to this, let's meet and come together. So again, please read the declaration from WCC, and also make sure you sign up for our convention. Support everyone. We need your all support. So thank you, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed this series. I think this will be my last video for my last solo video for the year. And we have one more week in the year, so that's not that long, but I'll see everyone by myself in the New Year's. I, again, will just let you all know the name of the channel will be changing to WCC, or We Charge Colonialism TV, but my weekly show will still be called African Esquire TV. So I hope to see you all in the new year. I hope you all are safe and blessed, and definitely keep staying together, keep building, keep talking, and we're going to make it. We just have to focus on what the enemy is, who our oppressor is, what they're trying to do, and what we have to do to reverse course. So thank you, everyone. Can I buy the book outside of Amazon? Not yet, but honestly, if you really are adamantly against Amazon, email me and I'll just give you a free PDF. So thank you, everyone, and you all. Hope you have a blessed day.